Hi there, if you're looking for an e-reader that is not a Kindle, you might have come across the name Pocketbook. Specifically, the Pocketbook Era has gained a lot of attention over the past year, and today I'm going to show you exactly how it compares to the Kindle. Now, the closest comparison to the Pocketbook Era is the Kindle Oasis, so I'll be using that device as my reference point. Now, even though both these devices help us read more books at the end of the day, the experience in which you do that is completely different, so I want to do my best to give you my honest thoughts about that, but here's my upfront summary if you don't want to watch the whole video. I think the Pocketbook Era is a great device for anyone looking to escape the Kindle ecosystem, but if you don't care about that and you don't mind being locked into the Amazon world, then I really do think owning a Kindle will be a much better experience for you. Now, with that being said, I'll do my best to show you both the pros and the cons of the Pocketbook Era. There'll be chapter markers down below. If you want to skip around, let's dive into it. Now, if you're like me and you've never heard of Pocketbook before, you're not alone. I had to research them myself. They are a company that was founded around 2007 in Switzerland, and they're actually really popular in Europe. They have a pretty extensive line of e-readers. The Pocketbook Era is one of the more popular ones and one of the more newer ones as well. The starting price for a 16GB model is $199, but if you want to get the upgraded version for $249, you'll get 64GB of storage. Now, compared to the Kindle Oasis, that is a bit cheaper. The starting price for a Kindle Oasis is about $250. For that same price, you get the higher version of the Era. Let's start by talking about some of the benefits of owning a Pocketbook Era, and I have to say there are quite a few, and I want to start with the build quality. From the second I unboxed this thing, I fell in love with the high quality design. Being a YouTuber, I've reviewed several e-readers now, and I have to say the Pocketbook is one of the only ones that I genuinely think is very, very good. Right next to the Kindle Oasis, in fact, the Pocketbook Era has the best design out of all the e-readers I've ever used. The design actually compares very nicely to the Kindle Oasis with a few notable exceptions. It is not using a metal design, but they are using a very high quality plastic, so it does not feel cheap at all. There's actually a bit of weight to it as well, which makes it feel more premium. On the front of the Pocketbook, we have a flush display as well as a nice sized bezel on the side to rest your hand on. It makes it very ergonomic to hold, and unlike the Kindle Oasis, this bezel actually has a lot more room to rest your thumb on because the page turn buttons, which this device does have, are actually tucked away on the side of the bezel. They're still there, but they're not taking up any space on the bezel itself, so holding this device is actually a lot easier than the Kindle Oasis. Now, alongside the page turn buttons, they also include two other buttons which are very unique. On the bottom of the device, we have a dedicated home button, which is very handy for going back to your main screen. Then on top of the page turn buttons is where you'll find that power button. Very interesting placement, but it does work. Now, if we flip the device to the back now, we will have this very textured design. Again, this is like a rubberized plastic. It's not metal or anything like that. And I do like the texture feeling. It has a much more grippy feeling to it. But the one downside to this grooved texture is that dust and debris can get stuck in here very easily. Now, let me spend a second talking about the screen of this device. It has a 300 ppi resolution, which basically means it's the highest quality screen you'll find on an e-reader. It's very crispy and exactly what you'll expect. It's using the latest e-ink Carta 1200 display model, the same kind of e-ink display you're gonna find on the newest Kindles. So the high quality screen is definitely there. Reading on this device is very pleasant. The Pocketbook also does have a warm light display, which is very handy for reading at night. I've had no issues with comfort or readability while reading on this device. It does work well in all lighting conditions. Now, there are a few other nice features of the Pocketbook that I definitely want to call out. The first one being a waterproof design. So if you read in the bathtub, for example, or by the beach, no worries there. You can read with this Pocketbook Era without any concern for water. Another benefit of the Pocketbook Era that you're not going to find on the Kindle is built-in speakers. You heard me. This device has built-in speakers and text-to-speech technology. Basically, any book that you read on the Pocketbook Era, there'll be a button you can press to have the device read it out loud to you. It's kind of like having a free Audible book every single time you read on this device. You could also pair Bluetooth headphones or Bluetooth speakers if you you wish. Now, it's not going to be like a professional person reading the text on the screen, but it does a pretty good job and it works really well. Now, there are a few other benefits of the Pocketbook Era that are in the software. The first one being you actually have other apps available to you on the Pocketbook, things like games, a calculator, you can even load music on here. There's an app for a photo frame so you can have custom pictures and use it as a frame. There's also a Dropbox integration for easily transferring files. So there's quite a few different things you can do on the Pocketbook besides reading books. But here's my take on this. I actually prefer the Kindle software because there's none of that extra distraction that you have in their software. On the Pocketbook, I found myself poking around all these other apps and playing around with it when really all I care about is reading books, and I like having a device that is as locked down as possible. On my Kindle, all I can do on there is read. With my Pocketbook, there are so many other tempting things to fiddle around with, and I actually think that's more of a con than a benefit. Now, with that being said, I do think there are some software features on the Pocketbook that are better than the Kindle. The first one being user profiles. If you have a partner or someone in your family who wants to use the Pocketbook as well, you can set up different profiles for each person and have your settings saved, so each person will have a custom experience, which is very, very handy if you want to share the device. Another small setting that I really appreciated that used to exist on the Kindle but no longer does is the ability to turn off all the recommendations on your home screen. On the Pocketbook, you can turn off all the extra suggestions and only see your personal library of books, which I really appreciate and I wish Kindle would bring back on their software. Another very useful feature of the Pocketbook is the ability to customize the touch areas while you're reading a book. On the Kindle, you don't have much flexibility of this, but on the Pocketbook, you can actually define what you want each area of the screen to do when you tap on it while reading. This kind of functionality is really, really handy if you have some custom needs and workflows that you want to follow, or you're more comfortable holding your device in a different way that the default settings won't support. You have a lot more control over settings and customization on the Pocketbook. And the last customizable option that I really found unique and useful is on the Pocketbook, you can actually choose which logo will show up when you're booting up the device and turning it off. It's actually really nice. You can get rid of all the Pocketbook branding and just use the book cover, for example, or you could even have it set so the screen is completely blank when it powers off. Moving right along, the next benefit of the Pocketbook Era is the ability to sideload ePub files onto this device. Now, I'll be talking more about this in the not so good part of the Pocketbook, but if you do have a library of ePubs, getting them onto the Pocketbook is really, really easy. You could simply plug it into your computer, drag and drop the files directly onto the Pocketbook. You cannot do that on Kindle. You have to use their Send to Kindle website to use the ePub files. On the Pocketbook though, they are natively supported, which is really nice. Now, depending on where you get your ePubs from, you might have to use the Adobe Digital Edition software to actually get the files to work properly on your Pocketbook Era. And you can also use the Send to Pocketbook feature to email files directly onto your device. So there are several different ways to get your ePubs onto here, which is much easier compared to Kindle, which requires that conversion step, which is not needed on the Pocketbook. Now, the last benefit that I could think of for owning a Pocketbook versus a Kindle is your privacy. Having a Pocketbook means you are completely unplugged from the Amazon algorithm. You're not feeding them more information about yourself and your reading habits. So I really do appreciate how this device is very much an independent and sandboxed environment. They aren't trying to feed you more and more books to buy or anything like that. They're not building a profile around you, at least I don't think they are. So I think if you're really concerned about your privacy and that's really important to you, having a Pocketbook is obviously a much better way to get out of that big tech Amazon ecosystem. All right, those were quite a few different benefits we talked about for the Pocketbook, but there are several different disadvantages to owning one, and I do think the disadvantages outweigh the pros. I personally would not want to use this as my everyday reader. So let me get into those topics right now. The first one, which is very, very silly, but very, very annoying, is there is no easy way to put this device into sleep mode. Now, I don't own one of the sleep covers for this device, so maybe owning that would make a big difference. But if you just own the Pocketbook with no case on it or anything like that, You would assume that pressing the power button once would put the device into sleep mode, but that is not the case. Actually, you have to hold the button down for several seconds and completely power it off. And the same thing for powering it on. You have to hold the button down for several seconds before it'll turn back on. I don't really understand why they chose to do this. There is a standby mode that will activate if you leave your Pocketbook untouched for a few minutes, but I don't like it too much because it keeps the text on the screen from the book that you are reading and kind of overlays a sleep image on top of that, which looks kind of weird in my opinion. I really wish it was like any other device where I just press the power button once and it'll go to a screensaver of some sort. That is a very strange decision from the Pocketbook software team. The next con that I want to talk about are the page turn buttons on this Pocketbook. I actually never use them. I try using them here and there, but the placement of them just does not work for me. I do enjoy having that larger bezel to rest my thumb on, but the trade-off to that is that buttons are located in this really weird location and they're a lot smaller and harder to press. I kind of like my Oasis a lot better. Even though they take up some space on the bezel, they're much easier to find and much easier to press. The next con that I want to talk about is probably a big one. If you're a Kindle person, you'll never have issues finding books. You can always go to the Amazon Kindle store and find the book that you want to buy and load it onto your Kindle without thinking twice about it. But on the Pocketbook, getting a book on this device is a lot more complicated and the workflow is just so much more work. Let me give you an example. The current book that I'm reading on my Pocketbook is Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. I'm really enjoying the book, but one thing I really didn't like was finding the way to get this book on the Pocketbook. The first thing I had to do was find a website that would sell me an EPUB file for this book. Luckily, there's a website out there that has a bunch of EPUB files for sale, but once I downloaded that file, I had to use Adobe Editions to unlock the file, and then I had to plug in my Pocketbook to my computer and drag and drop the file, and then only then would it show up on my device. Now compare that to the Kindle ecosystem, where I literally go to Amazon's website, press the buy now with one click button, and boom, the book is already on my device waiting for me. That is such a night and day difference in terms of the experience. Now there is a bookstore on the Pocketbook where you can browse for books and things like that, but it's very limited. It's not the same thing as Amazon's bookstore, and from what I can tell, downloading EPUB files from the web using the browser app on the Pocketbook does not work either. You have to use a computer all the time and transfer files manually. Now say you do go through the trouble of getting a book on your device. If you are a note taker, the next con that you're going to experience is the worst note-taking experience ever on the Pocketbook Era. Now this is definitely the number one reason why I will not be using a Pocketbook as my primary e-reader. Highlighting on this device is so difficult. Dragging my finger across a sentence is such a painful experience because it doesn't do it right away. You have to drag these little toggle things around the area you want to highlight, and even that doesn't work very reliably sometimes. It just is a very painful experience, and I don't know why it doesn't compare even close to my Kindle. The Pocketbook does have a few extra options for marking up your ePubs, so I do give them credit for having additional options other than highlighting, but since highlighting is my primary way of taking notes on my Pocketbook and on my e-readers in general, that's a really important feature for me, and I simply cannot do it well on my Pocketbook. And even for the highlights that I am able to take, there is no simple way of being able to export them off of my Pocketbook. On my Kindle, I use the Readwise service, which is a third-party app which nicely integrates and syncs all my highlights over. With the Pocketbook, there is no support for Readwise, and even if you don't want to use Readwise and you just want to manually export, it does it in this weird HTML format, which you can't really do anything with. So the highlights are kind of stuck in their own way, in their own format, which is really frustrating because I love reviewing my old highlights and having a database of all my notes in one central location. I simply can't do that on my Pocketbook. So as you can see, I can't really recommend the Pocketbook unless you really want to escape the Amazon ecosystem. When it comes to getting books onto your Pocketbook and then being able to take notes with them, those two things are pretty much the biggest deal breakers for me. But outside of that, this is a really great device. The hardware is really nice. I love the design of it. And I do think with some future software updates, this could be a very functional device for a lot of people. Now, if you want to learn more about other Amazon competitors, I have a whole video detailing my comparison with Kobo and Kindle, which I think is the closest competitor to the Kindle ecosystem. Link for that on the screen right now. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.